Szanowni Państwo, bardzo serdecznie Państwa witam na dzisiejszej konferencji, debacie Metan, technologia, gospodarka, polityka. Chciałem na początku bardzo serdecznie wszystkich Państwa przywitać w imieniu pani poseł do Parlamentu Europejskiego Izabeli Kloc, która jest organizatorem, inicjatorem i pomysłodawcą dzisiejszej debaty. Bardzo serdecznie w Pani imieniu i Pani europoseł witam serdecznie.
Good morning. I would also like to welcome the Voivod of Silesia, Jarosław Wieczorek. In today's debate and conference, we will have Maria Spyraki, MEP, who deals with the reduction of methane emissions reporting, who will be joining us online. Ireneusz Zyska, Secretary of State from the Ministry of Climate and Environment, he'll be joining us online as well. We also have participants of this important debate, Professor Stanisław Prusek, the Director of the Central Mining Authority, Professor Stanisław Nawrat, Professor of the Mining AGH University in Krakow, Ryszard Dyrda, entrepreneur. I don't know if Tomasz Heryszek, the CEO of Anglo Cox, who I hope is here with us as well. I also want to welcome the CEO of Polska Grupa Górnicza, Tomasz Rogala. I would like to welcome the CEO of Tauro New Technologies, Piotr Apollo. I would like to welcome all of you according to the rank of your positions. Methane, is it a threat? Is it a waste material? Is it a precious raw material? Today, the answers, we will look for the answers in the presentations of professors, important speakers who have contributed a lot in their academic life and who dedicated this time to explore how to use this energy resource. I hope this debate will give answers to many questions. But before we move on to it, I would like to give the floor to the MEP Izabela Kloc to give an opening speech. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really happy we are here together to talk about a subject that might sound very technical, but it's very important from the point of view of the economy of Silesia, Poland, and growth of these areas. Despite the war, inflation, and the energy crisis, the Green Deal, the European Green Deal, is speeding up. It's not slowing down. It's spreading among other areas of economy. Now we'll have to deal with methane, the emissions of greenhouse gases. That's mainly agriculture, waste management, and fossil fuels. For the two first, there are no binding regulations or proposals. The Green Deal is to impact only the fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. That's why we are here. We're all involved in this debate on methane. All these regulations that are planned are subject to all the mistakes that affect Green Deal in general. They are too little flexible. They're only focused on the environmental goals. They don't take into account the stability of the energy market and human security. I'm talking about the work of miners. As we know, it's one of the biggest hazards in coal mining. We know it very well in Silesia. There's no other way to get rid of it other than through ventilation shafts. It's a technological requirement. We need to do it this way to secure the lives, to provide safety for the lives of miners. Here we know it very well. Capturing and utilizing methane for the production of energy is one of the areas that we are really good at. We have universities involved in it, scientific and research institutes. We have representatives of energy and coal mining companies, but also private entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, the European Commission wants to reduce methane emissions by norms, penalties, orders. That's the only way they know. Let me give you an example. Within 3 years, we need to have half of a ton of methane per 1,000 kilograms of coal mined, which is impossible, such requirements. The factors that the rates for Poland were 10 times bigger when we calculated them for this year. JSW calculated the penalties that would be imposed due to not sticking to the requirements. That's 2 billion per year. This cannot be upheld. We cannot distribute. It's impossible to maintain. We've got the CEO of JSW here. Yeah, that's something that we cannot sustain. So we need to give a clear message to Brussels. We are for the transition, but Polish mining cannot become a victim of this. In those days where coal, we've already said that there was a slogan that we used to use. Now it's revived, that coal is the black gold. We remember a lot of energy and a lot of emotions on this when we prepared the schedule of phasing out Polish coal mining. It was one of the most difficult documents to be negotiated with Brussels. We had to come to terms between the benefits for the economy, but also the requirements of the EU and the rights and interests of hundreds and thousands of employees. Brussels is also a signatory of a schedule of phasing out Polish mining until 2049, and these documents have some plans for the reduction of methane involved. How can we come to terms, reconciliate them with the regulations that are being prepared by the European Commission? It's not a secret if I say that the competencies of the officials of the European Commission are far from perfect. That's what happened when we had the Green Deal that was being propelled. And here in the case of methane, there's a lot of contradictions in those regulations. There's the impact on competitiveness are not taken into account. That's some of the flaws of this document. As an MEP from Silesia, I do not intend to remain silent. In the commission that I am a member of on research and energy, I became a counter-reporter on the project on methane. I prepared 90 corrections, amendments to this project. Obviously they involve oil and gas as well, but let's speak about coal because we're in Silesia. Open cast mines should be excluded from the regulation. it does not refer to us. Then, because here we mainly have underground mines. Then the second postulate that I proposed is that methane provisions should be excluded from the coal mines that are to be phased out until 1937, because the purchase of the equipment that is really costly is not economically justified to burden these coal mines with such huge investments if they are to be closed pretty soon. Then post-mining activities should be excluded from the regulation, which is due mainly to the fact that we cannot share the responsibility for the emissions among entities who transport, who mine, and who store coal. Another consequence of this regulation is unequal treatment of EU and external producers of coal. So we will have all these restrictions, and importers, I'm looking at CEO Heryszek, so importers will not be affected by that. So we would like these regulations to affect the importers as well. So I'm really happy to have such fantastic guests here at this conference, but I would also like to mention those who are absent. In the previous conferences, we had representatives of the European Commission. They got involved online, directors of departments, commissioners. When we addressed the Directorate General for Energy and Mining to take part in this conference and to present the regulations on methane, well, after a long silence, we yesterday received information that they would not get involved. They officially even wrote that they just don't want to take part in a political conference, as they called it. So I leave it to you to make an opinion of it. But today it's a very technical conference. We have normally the Prime Minister would also join us, but I thought that today it's a very good time to have a very in-depth discussion on how we could exercise pressure on Brussels, how to lobby Brussels, how EU, I'm looking at CEO Rogala, all the associations in Europe should get involved to mitigate the impact of this regulation. We have some allies in the European Parliament. Let me remind you of my fight in Sigbam, regarding Sigbam. I'm not going to go back in detail to it, but in the Commission, we did manage to pass these changes. We also had this conference here, so it was the extension of the time for CO2 allowances. It was a very huge advance as compared to what the Commission proposed. And also in the European Parliament, these amendments were passed, right? And finally, before the final voting, S&D just realized what was going on, that the Green Deal would be passed in a different form. So they announced a break, and then it all took a different course. Another voting was a month later, when they had some agreements made already. But this struggle, well, I'm from Silesia, but this persistence and aiming towards a goal paid off, because now we're facing negotiations with the EU Council and the European Commission. This is going to be a moment where we can discuss and improve the Green Deal. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank also MP Gawenda to chair this meeting. Because among these guests who know this topic very well, it's good if this conference is very specialist conference is chaired by somebody from the sector. Thank you.
Do Parlamentu Europejskiego pani Izabeli Kloc. Rzeczywiście tych
Much, Madam European MP Isabella Klotz. Well, your operations on the European milieu, and let me just add the very fact that the coking coal has been entered into the list of strategic resources, and we have Wojewód Wieczorek, and I would like to hear from his kind of words of introduction. Can I remain standing? Well, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Member of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, presidents, professors, Mr. Mayor, all of you dear and acclaimed guests, it is the sixth time that I have a pleasure of opening this conference and welcoming you to this conference. And well-deserved words of congratulation and all for this determination to MEP Isabella Klotz, because this is particularly important to hear the voice of Upper Silesia. We have been stressing that over the recent years, how important resource policy is, how important the coal is in terms of energy diversification, energy safety. Well, Europe unfortunately didn't listen to us too much, and they don't do that today because they kind of feel embarrassed, I suppose. That's my personal opinion, obviously. I don't know what to say in a situation when Russia invaded Ukraine. The world changed. The approach towards energy resources changed. The approach towards coal changed. Suddenly, it turns out that we need coal, that this is a resource that is absolutely prerequisite to secure energy security of our citizens, of the people of Europe. But this is war. And we know that the European Commission and Europe will primarily focus on the strategic programs, and without being ashamed, they will stick firmly to the decarbonization program and the intent to phase this sector of economy out, to cut it out from further growth options. It seems to me that the very purpose of this conference is to actually prove that resource economy and coal economy is still something that will be absolutely required prerequisite to stabilize the energy market. And I'm not just saying about Poland or Europe. Actually, the entire world will succumb to that. And therefore, in terms of those material and substantive matters, I will probably not add anything in terms of methane use. Well, obviously, I'm actually ignorant in this respect, and I shall not do that considering how an acclaimed panel of specialists we are at. I just wish that this conference actually gives you some very specific conclusions, those that can actually convince the European Commission about the very option that methane capture is going to be used not only for the improvement of the quality of air, or that we can actually find those technological solutions that will allow us to use the methane captured for the sake of economic development and technological development. Now, this social concord process between the mining community and the social element includes the development elements, such as the Upper Silesia Transition Fund that is going to be passed, that is going to become a leverage for the development of the technologies that may just become the very future of our region. All the best, all of you. Have a good conference and reach some very decent and material conclusions. All the best. Thank you very much, Wojciech. Let me just add that having you here at this conference clearly highlights the fact that all these elements related to sustainable development and all other matters that are particularly important from the perspective of Upper Silesian Voivodeship come first in terms of your priorities. And this is why we consider your presence here very important. And I hope that the conclusions that we will reach at this conference will also, you will also find important. I'm talking the search for individual solutions that will make this incredibly complicated process of transition, however, a process that is particularly important to our region, will follow the right path in terms of energy and resource security. Now I would like us to connect with the member of the European Parliament, Maria Spyraki, who is a rapporteur as far as the methane emission reduction regulation. And let me please remain seated for the rest of this debate.
I'd like to thank you for inviting me to this conference. Methane emissions are an essential element within EU's 2030 climate goals and towards the climate neutrality by 2050. Methane is a greenhouse gas 84 times more potent than CO2 over a 20-year time period, but remained until recently almost overlooked. Now, this has changed. Methane has gained momentum and it is now considered a priority not only at the EU but also at the global level. According to the International Energy Agency, methane has been responsible for around 30% of the rise in the global temperatures since the Industrial Revolution, and therefore the rapid and sustained reductions in methane emissions are considered of high importance to limiting near-term global warming and improving air quality. In the light of COP27, I would like here to recall and refresh that within the COP26, the Global Methane Pledge, which has been adopted from more than 100 countries, intend to proceed with immediate and rapid reductions in methane emissions, paying attention to economic and social sustainability in this decade, and as one of the most effective measures for EU climate action. Here, I would like to highlight that these countries, representing more than 70% of the global economy and nearly half of anthropogenic methane emissions, and they have been committed themselves to a collective goal of reducing global methane emissions by at least 30% from 2020 levels by 2030, and moving towards using best available inventory methodologies to quantify methane emissions. It has been identified that the energy sector, including oil, natural gas, coal and bioenergy, accounts for around 40% of methane emissions from human activity. Tackling methane emissions from the energy sector represents one of the best short-term opportunities for limiting global warming because the pathways for reducing them are well known and often cost-effective. This endeavour is also in line with the Paris Agreement's goal and the EU's Green Deal. As rapporteur on behalf of the European Parliament and the INI report for the methane strategy, we set the scene and created a clear and concrete roadmap for the tackling of methane emissions in the EU by supporting the establishment of an independent international methane emissions observatory in partnership with the United Nations Environmental Program and the Climate and Clean Energy Coalition and the International Energy Agency. Now, as Shadow Rapporteur for ENVI Committee on the report for methane emissions reduction in the energy sector, I strongly support an ambitious planning, among others, on how reliable data will be transferred on the International Emissions Observatory and what applicable measures will be pushed inside and outside the EU. This is more than crucial, as it seems that the proposal submitted by the European Commission gets on board these suggestions, but our role here in the European Parliament is to safeguard that the scope will be as broad as it needs to be. Practically, the Commission's proposals provides for the highest standards for measuring them, reporting and verification of energy sector methane emission, it is the well-known MOV, and the immediate reduction of emissions through mandatory leak detection and repair system and ban on venting and flaring. As far as the first point is concerned, I have already underlined the importance of adopting a strong, independent and scientific rigorous monitoring, reporting and verification system for all methane emitting sectors, including through the adoption of rules, standards and methodologies. In this regard, according to the Commission's proposal, a global methane emitters monitoring tool based on most innovative satellite technology is essential to provide information on the magnitude, recurrence and allocation of high methane emitting sources. This will help us to understand where exactly and how much methane is emitted. Such a positioning seems to be on the right direction, as it means a shift from estimates to direct measurements, checked by independent verifiers. Regarding the second point about the leak detection and repair programs, who had suggested on the relevant motion for resolution, which is very critical to cover the full supply chain in the energy and petrochemical sectors. A strong LDAR program is a critical element of the EU strategy, and the lack of data is no reason not to reduce and mitigate anthropogenic methane emissions. LDAR technologies are evolving quickly, with several innovations in development in this sector. It's well identified that methane emissions from inactive oil and gas wells pose public health, safety and environmental risks. Given that, the Commission sets the scheme and proposed that monitoring and reporting obligations should still apply, and those wells and well sites should be reclaimed and remediated. In such cases, Member States should have a predominant role, in particular to establish inventories and mitigation plans. In this regard, I strongly support that it is very important for us the provision of a clear legislation at the EU level in order to avoid unnecessary legislative overlaps. The EU methane regulation is a key component of the EU strategy to reduce methane emissions. As we noted, the EU methane regulation must go beyond a few simple transparency measures on input to secure concrete reduction of methane emission associated with our consumption. In that way, we have to ensure the consistency of the National Emission Reduction Commitments Directive with meeting the EU's air quality objectives, as well as the Union's 2030 climate goals and its objectives of climate neutrality by 2050. Therefore, the binding emissions reduction targets for the Member States in the effort shared regulation has to be aligned in order to reduce methane emissions as part of overall greenhouse gas reductions, alongside with the upcoming revision of the Industrial Emissions Directive. In that sense, it is imperative to argue the Commission to set an EU binding methane emission target, since the proposal does not contain a specific one, and expanding the scope, including the petrochemicals, to the sectors that needed to be covered. It is widely accepted that a swift and cost-effective reduction of methane emissions in the energy sector, among others, is a necessity, as it is regarded as the most effective strategy to reduce global warming. Now it is time to act, because methane emissions represents a health and safety threat to citizens. What we need is an ambitious and realistic legislative framework in order to reduce methane emissions immediately, imposing at the same time a compliance indicator to the private sector for their own responsible performance and operations. We need to set binding EU targets covering all parts of the energy sector, gas, oil and coal, including abandoned and closed coal mines, and in the next step, not excluding waste management and agriculture. At the same time, we shall provide support to companies to achieve performance standards in an optimal manner while fully respecting the polluter pays principle. This is key to avoid too high costs for the citizens. Since there is a lot of technology involved here, and this is why the contribution of the industry experts is so important on our mission, I am convinced that all of us can contribute and put our cornerstone to the reducing methane emissions effort. Thank you very much once again for your attention.
Bardzo serdecznie dziękuję.
Thank you very much, Madam MEP. I would also like us to connect with Minister Ireneusz Zyska, who indeed is connecting with us. Minister, hello.
Państwu. Szanowna Pani
Dear MEP, dear MP, Mr. Voivod, CEOs, directors, professors of wonderful universities, and the State Geological Institute. I'm really honored I can be part of this conference. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to specifically thank the MEP Isabella Kloss and MP Adam Gawenda for the invitation. My presence here answer might be a surprise for you, because I am the proxy for the government on renewable sources of energy. I also deal with hydrogen management. But my presence here is a proof that the Polish government is very responsible when thinking about this energy sector, and it's to confirm that we need to build the energy mix in a sustainable way. This aggression of Russia on Ukraine and the system of making the EU dependent on Russian gas that was built for many years before, and treating these resources, specifically gas, as a tool of aggression, as an element of a hybrid war against the European Union and all the countries in the EU, including Poland. This forces us to take a different approach to diversification of supplies of fossil fuels, of energy resources to Europe, to Poland, which is obviously of the biggest interest to us, but also the issue of producing energy on our own. I'm really happy to know that the Council of Ministers, shortly after the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, it was in March this year, they passed an amendment to the assumptions for the energy policy 2040 for Poland. It's a strategic document where we added another fourth pillar that has become now the first main pillar, which is energy independence. And we're trying, that's our goal now, to produce energy and heat based on the resources that we have internally in our country, all the fossil fuels and energy generating fuels and resources, but also what has been delegated to me was the renewable sources of energy. Now, as for methane emissions and reduction of methane emissions at the level of the European Union, that's an important issue. But since we are here in the coal mining sector, in this group of coal mining sector representatives, it's not true that coal fights RES and RES fights coal. We need to be sustainable. We want these two sources of energy to cooperate and supplement each other to provide stable supplies of energy for end customers, to increase the competitiveness of the Polish economy and the possibility of functioning internationally and on a global scale. But also within the European Union, we want to remain competitive. I would like to thank MEP Isabella Claude and all our MPs of Law and Justice who are involved under EKR in the European Parliament for the rational approach to energy. We cannot have a situation where the European Union, European Commission, as decision makers don't take into account the specificity of particular countries. I really regret that we don't have any representatives of the European Commission here at the conference, because they should listen to these arguments. If somebody is saying it's a political conference, then it's really mean and to say that, honestly, because the presence of CEOs, of professors, it proves that we want to have a very substantive approach to this subject, because using methane for energy production, using this resource that we have, will result in less need for imports of energy sources from outside the country. I know we need to purify it and clean it and to use it, but it can be used for the production of heat and energy. And besides, we're implementing what the European elites are craving for, right? So reusing the methane, preventing it from being released to the atmosphere, which is 25 times more of greenhouse gas as CO2. It should be appreciated by the European Commission. And we were planning our energy mix until 2049, as the MEP has mentioned, under a social agreement with the mining sector, coal mining sector, where we agreed to phase out coal. We need to be doing it in a sustainable way and to provide other sources of energy, like nuclear energy. We need a stable energy source as the background. Without stable, flexible sources of energy, the whole system of energy production in the country cannot function well, and we cannot build RES sources. They include biogas, methane. We can use the Polish agriculture sector or landfills of waste, or water and sewage treatment plants, where we can purify the gas to produce pure methane or biogas. So we need to supply the economy with what we have at our hands. We've been producing 4 billion of cubic meters of methane per year, but it's very needed. If we drain methane from coal deposits with the approval of the European Commission, because nobody is expecting we will close the coal mines for overnight. It's absurd. And I think the greenest representatives of the European Commission and of the European elites realize that. So until then, we need to use both coal as a resource that is used in district heating and energy production. You know that Poland has the biggest share of district heating in Europe. We have district heating providing heat for housing estates with thousands of inhabitants. So this is totally different from Western European countries. It has to be taken into account in these regulations on methane emissions from coal mines. What Isabella Klotz is saying in the European Parliament will be definitely strengthened by the whole representation of our environment, of our law and justice party. We will try and convince the EU elite that these solutions need not to be against a group, professional group, regional group, or a country. Here, actually, it's against the Upper Silesia, right, and the basin, adjacent basin. It has to be suitable for all the regions and all the groups. So I hope that the presence of few people of science, academia, practitioners from the energy and coal sectors will allow us to provide rational arguments for those who unfairly try to hinder the development of Polish economy. We cannot allow that. At conferences, I always try and speak of not turning energy into ideology. It has to be based on rationale, because this provides security for end users and customers, and has to be stable, it has to be continuous, and at affordable prices. What I'm proposing here in the regulation, what the European Commission is proposing is not unacceptable, and it threatens the security, energy security of the whole economy of Poland. So thank you very much once again for inviting me. And let me extend my the best regards from the Minister of the Environment. And I think Piotr Dziadzio, main land survey specialist in the country, but he's working in the field now, so unfortunately he's not here with us. But I hope the Polish representation in the European Parliament will effectively force these beneficial regulations, not only beneficial for the European elite, but also for Poland, the Polish economy. Have a fruitful debate, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Minister, for showing us the main directions of development, because when today we speak about all these issues, about the economic interests of Poland and Silesia, it's difficult not to notice all those elements that are very important and return every time we have a debate of this kind. In 2010, I suggested some solutions to supporting methane with the agreement of the Energy Authority and the government. We agreed on certificates for methane, green certificates, and I know that some coal mining companies use methane for cogeneration, and they acquired some funds due to that for some investments. I'm thinking about JSW, but not only. And Kompania Węglowa back then used this opportunity. And I'm convinced that this debate that actually touches upon a very important fact of using and increasing the utilization of methane is very important. But also, Ms. Izabela Klotz, she also mentioned that. But apart from the goals that we have, we also need time to utilize this resource of energy. We need some instruments that will not break the whole order of this transformation that is part of the energy policy for 2040 for our country, but they will contribute to strengthening our independence as regards energy security, which in the face of the war that is going on, it's extremely important. We cannot yield here and give up, because if the European Commission representatives participated in today's debate, they would hear arguments, substantive arguments to support our approach, because we're trying to care about the environment, but it cannot be unsustainable. There are many countries that do not meet those important environmental goals and climate goals, but we need to take a broader look at the broader perspective on the matter. We have professors here with us. I would like to give the floor to Professor Stanisław Prusek, the director of the Central Mining Institute. Please, the floor is yours.
Dziękuję. Przede wszystkim chciałem
So thank you very much. And first and foremost, thank you, Madam MEP, for inviting me to this conference. And well, the thing that I would like to start my presentation with, Madam MP, Voivods, ministers, all of you dear acclaimed guests, recognized guests of this conference, I will do my best to, actually keep the time regime. It is a typical thing for, university professors that if you don't actually keep them on a tight leash, sometimes it is difficult. Now, I haven't mentioned that, however, there are obviously some specialisms in terms of methane. Methane is concerned, some of the information you will be familiar with. So the title of my presentation, as Madam MEP was mentioned, is actually something that is in the title of my presentation, that methane is actually a threat. Indeed it is. However, it's also a valuable energy source. So I prepared to you a couple of pieces of information, and both Madam MEP and Mr. Gawenda have already mentioned that. The European regulation, that's one thing. However, I also added two other regulations of key importance that we were all referring to. What was announced at COP26 was an obligation to reduce methane emission, global methane reach. Without Poland, Poland actually did not sign this obligation. And that's actually with regard to the highlights and benchmarks from 2020. So Poland did not sign this global methane pledge. And I would like to highlight some few more things mentioned before and related to this very regulation. With regard to mines, and we are talking about mines that this regulation applied to. That is the active operational underground mines, also open pit mines of lignite, but also decommissioned, phased out mines as well. So very briefly through individual articles, through individual provisions. Article 22 basically prohibits release of methane from the methanation stations, starting from the 1st of January 2027. It is prohibited to release methane to the atmosphere for ventilation shafts from coal mines other than coking coal mines, emitting more than half a ton of methane per 1,000 tons of coal extracted of the haulage. Now, both our producers and different organizations, including Polish organizations, had some reservations to this regulation, and some of those provisions are to be changed. This limit increased to 3 tons. However, this completely does not actually eliminate a problem. I suppose Mr. Gola is going to say more about that. The limit that would be satisfactory would definitely be far beyond 10 tons of methane per 1,000 tons of coal extracted. Now, coking coal, which is included in the list of critical resources, is not subject to this regulation. Well, it is actually. Mr. Welek from Jastrzębska Spółka Węglowa Jastrzębie-Zdrój Coal Company is here with us. They've been tracking that, and there is a provision that this regulation will also include coking coal mines with a threshold date also defined. We are talking about roughly 3 years since the enactment of this regulation. Madam MEP that connected to us from Brussels mentioned that there is going to be some verifiers appointed. So the verifiers organization will probably play a significant, crucial part in the entire implementation of this implementation. Is International Methane Emission Observatory. They will perform the role of verification for all the data related to methane emission. For our institute, we can only say that we participate in the operations of EMEO. Our representative is a part of the steering committee, so we obviously try to track what's happening there. Madam MEP mentioned satellite technologies used to monitor methane emissions. Now, in a moment, I will show you what we in our institute do in this respect. And one more thing, very important, and again, I'm quoting this Madam MEP. If there was actually the citation index matter here, it would be very, very high. However, Madam MEP mentioned that the monitoring of post-extraction, post-mining operations is also very important. Don't know, personally, maybe some of you knows, how it will go about in practice. This is science fiction to me. This is actually sci-fi. This is completely unrealistic. In terms of post-mining operation, which means something that is actually operated after the phasing out of the given coal mine, haulage of coal to the ground, including transshipment, processing, working, storage, and coal transport with virtually no methodology. This probably will become an opportunity to work out some individual tools and instruments, and therefore a very challenging matter. And these are the provisions that are already in place. Yet another significant provision, and we have about 12 months to go about that, if obviously the regulation will pass, and it will fly in this particular phrasing. What we have to do is draw out a list of all phased-out mines, coal mines, within our respective territory. On the one hand, well, somebody will say, yes, there's plenty of information about that, and that's true. We have lots of information about that. However, this is but a huge challenge because we are also talking about the coal mines phased out in the lower Silesian coal region. And probably even more challenging thing, 18 months since the enactment of this regulation, that's the deadline for listing out all those infrastructure elements mentioned in Appendix 7 in Part 1, Subpoint 5, with regard to phased-out coal mines and decommissioned coal mines, where the operations had been phased out by 50 years prior to the date of enactment of this regulation. So these are virtually all ventilation shafts, all haulage tracts, all the fractured deposits and other individual point-based sources of methane emission. Now, based on the initiative of our institute, actually, what is very important is this Methane Excellence Center. It's actually been operating at the auspices of the experts from the European Economic Commission, UNEC, one of the commissions operating under the aegis of the United Nations Organization. And some of the tasks of ICE-CMM is the promotion of best practices and obviously contribution to the development of European regulations. And in the recent times, Polska Grupa Górnicza and the HGH Academy of Mining Metallurgy have become the active members of this organization. Now a few words of technical significance, since it was mentioned that this is actually a substantive or subject-specific conference. So let me tell you a couple of words as far as methane is concerned, as far as the utilization or processing of methane is concerned. It is odorless, colorless gas, which is lighter than air, which is actually quite significant in the context of further slides, especially one where we have filmed individual processes how it actually inflames, how it ignites. Now, hydrogen is also odorless, it's also colorless. However, the greenhouse effect of methane, the global warming potential, as it is referred to, I assumed 100 years thereof. So it is 28 times more potent than CO2 over 100 years. And we have to bear this 28-year period of presence of methane in the atmosphere. Now, as far as methane emissions globally is concerned, that is data from the report of the International Energy Agency. All of the methane addition, that is 580 million tons, including anthropogenic emission, that corresponds to 348 million tons. As far as sources are concerned, next to natural ones, waterlogged and obviously the energy and mining sector is dominant, and we can here you see divided into nearly 43 million tons per annum from actually petroleum industry, petroleum-based industry. Now, methane emission in Poland, latest report by Kobize, we are talking about 44.4 million tons of CO2 equivalent. And energy sector is dominant here, but that also includes oil and gas, agriculture, and waste. Now, in terms of methane in the mining industry, and I'm talking about hard coal mining mainly. So this is a kind of a schematic diagram that shows you how it go about. Individual coal beds which are unextracted, and this is referred to as coal bed methane. Pre-train methane, actually, from coal bed. We were extracting those in 2017, 2018 in Milowice, mainly the Polish Geological Institute and PGNiG tried extraction of methane from the non-operated coal beds using microfracturing technologies. We are talking about surface-based and underground coals in underground coal mines. Methane is released during operation. We are talking about CMM, as it is referred to. And methane is captured and transported using demethanation pipelines, but some of the methane goes into ventilating air, and we are talking about VAM, so ventilation air methane. There is also something what is referred to as PMM, post-mining methane, as well as abandoned mine methane. Now, methane in hard coal has this sorptive condition, more than 90% of methane, actually. Well, obviously, there are threats in my title, actually. It is actually something that can inflammate, that can explode. This is a threat, obviously, this is a danger. However, I would like to show you some absolutely unique photographs. Several years ago at the Barbara experimental mine in Mikołów, and I know you, European MP, you visited this experimental coal mine many times. There were some unique experimental works on the Coal and Steel Research Fund. That's where we started and explored the phenomenon of ignition and explosion of methane. Actually, we can just imagine how it goes about in natural conditions and how important and how dangerous this phenomenon truly is, and what the consequences are if such a dangerous phenomenon happens in underground mines. So you can see explosion of methane with post-combustion of methane. Now this methane bed, post-inflammation, as you can see, it is lighter than air, so it's significantly above the ground at the top of this test corridor. Now, imagine temperatures. Initial temperature, as far as ignition is concerned, roughly 650 degrees Celsius. This is obviously due to different reasons, sparks, some short circuit. However, temperatures of explosion, depending on different matters, however, they range from 1,600 to 2,650 degrees Celsius. So this atmosphere is absolutely something that is fatal. Some information about the emission of methane from coal mines. Let us focus on this table. It collates these pieces of information. The total methane, this absolute methane capacity is 500 million methane per year. Last year, that's how much methane was released in operation. Now, ventilation this ventilation methane capacity actually, as you can see, and this in terms of demethanation systems, we managed to capture 340 million cubic meters. We utilize 40, so it means that using that unutilized methane is quite significant. So the efficiency of methane utilization is very important matrix, and therefore what Minister has already mentioned is very, very important, because incentives are actually very important, especially as far as studies and research is considering. So obviously, research and development in this respect, as Mr. mentioned, is particularly important. Now, what about the utilization of methane? Obviously, we use it for cogeneration motors, for thermal electricity production methods. We are talking about nearly 200,000 megawatt hours of electric energy based on that, and nearly 370,000 gigajoules of thermal energy produced from methane, and we are talking about sales to external entities at a level of 160 million tons per annum. I know that the next presenter will also mention that. Professor Navrat is going to speak about that. There is also going to be a presentation about ventilation methane, making use of the kindness of Mr. Badylak. I use his data from JSW. I wanted to highlight where the problematic conditions are, for those of you that don't know that. The problem of ventilation methane utilization is that the ventilation shafts discharge enormous streams of air. As you can see in this table, they range from more than a dozen up to 30,000 cubic meters of air per minute plus, actually. And the content of methane is from 0.3 to roughly 0.5%. This maximum concentration is roughly 0.45%. Our regulations obviously admit the maximum threshold of methane concentration, and it is 0.75%. We absolutely mustn't exceed this level on account of the current regulations, and obviously mines stick to that regulation, to these thresholds, very scrupulously. Obviously, these in terms of how methane from ventilation is used, there's a number of different technologies and tools that is used for that purpose. What is done worldwide? Now, there are two dominant technologies. The thermal flow reverse reactor oxidation technology and the regenerative thermal oxidation reactor. That is one, and catalytic flow reversal reactor oxidation technology is the second one. This is a schematic representation of these two technologies. On the left-hand side, you can see the pros and cons of the thermal flow reversal reactor. And, well, you can just have a look at those data. However, I would like to highlight two things. Well, they are most resistant to dusting and to humidity. However, in order to be efficient, they need at least 1% of methane, and that's what we don't have in the ventilation air stream. However, as far as catalytic reactors are concerned, the upside is that they have a required methane concentration starting from 0.15. However, they are not only expensive, but also not too resistant to dust concentration and to the impact of humidity. Very few can actually afford these reactors. Now, very briefly, ladies and gentlemen, now the very first demo installation of TFFR reactors was in 1994 in the UK, then in Australia, a system that operated for 10 years with a with a steam turbine of 6 megawatts of capacity. As far as I'm concerned, there is this kind of a system operating in a U.S. Mine in Marshall County. And there are also some systems being built in China. I suppose one of the biggest ones is the Gaohe mine with 12 TFFR reactors with utilization potential being about 9 million cubic meters of methane per annum. Now, what about Poland? What was happening? We have Professor Nawrat. Yeah, I know I'm stealing a part of your thunder here. However, we are making reference to the very same research and studies. At Jasmos mine, actually, there was this test installation built in 2012. At the Barbara experimental mine in Kołów, we have not yet completed a test and experimental system that uses the catalytic oxidation reactor at the ventilation shaft, and we were already testing methane utilization as commissioned by Profile, that's the name of the company, using the RCO technology in order to become able to utilize the ventilation air methane. Yet another project that is currently in progress, we are testing that. The Center for the Technology Transfer and Promotion. Namely, how to install such a catalytic reactor underground. The very concept is that in a space where such a system with such a catalytic reactor is supposed to be installed, is aimed to make use of methane to produce heat, then convert it into cold under typical operating conditions, assuming the circular economy or in line with circular economy conditions. Now, this is a kind of a test rig that is built from scratch. A very important point, R&D point for the sake of testing the efficiency of this catalytic reactor. Now, it seems that there are reasons to be proud about the REM project. This is something to really be proud about, because this is a project that gathers 6 partners. The Central Mining Institute is the main coordinator, plus the Institute of Petroleum and Natural Gas, plus the Oviedo University, JSW, and the Insemex Institute of Petroșani, Romania, financed from the funds of RFCS. And the very goal of this is to actually develop some technology to make use of the methane from GOPS in order that the methane from GOPS is not introduced into the ventilation air. Generally speaking, to reduce methane emission into the atmosphere. Now, this project is definitely aligned with the strategy of JSW, which assumes that by 2030 they will reduce their carbon footprint by 30% compared to 2018. However, by 2025, will also increase the capacity of their engines by 60 megawatts of electric energy, and by 2025, 95% of the methane captured will be utilized. Correct me if I'm wrong in any of the figures here, since we have the director of JSW here, but this is roughly the range of, let's say, benchmarks that we are going to focus on. Now, we have already talked about the monitoring systems, and I'm slightly there in terms of the closing part of my presentation. Not yet there, though. However, this is a very simple ventilation system diagram. Now, what are the pros of this system? Well, it's simplicity. This will allow us to monitor how much methane is released into the ventilation stack. We want to make use of all the available metering technologies in order to improve the precision of measurements. Yes, satellite technologies seem quite appealing, and I will show you kind of diagrams. However, ground-based technologies are also very important, very promising. We have to make them fail-safe. We have to prove and test them. We have to assess the accuracy of individual methane emission monitoring systems. Yet another very interesting project, kind of a futuristic, sci-fi based project. However, this is actually a project of an innovative mine of the future. Professor, could you please be getting towards the end? Yes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. So the Mastermind project is actually aimed at developing such a state-of-the-art demethanation system for this mine of the future. And yes, I'm speeding up a little bit. I'm nearly at the end, I promise. So what's been our Central Mining Institute doing for quite some time? We've been, cooperating with some commercial entities, with the GAG SAT, a Canadian business, in terms of application of satellite technologies for monitoring of methane emission. We've been trying to test the accuracy of individual images that we receive. We are also testing how drones and laser sensor can be used. Yeah, drones are kind of trending now, right? However, we really have to test and prove how accurate they are, and for that sake, obviously, we have to conduct a number of studies with air velocity, humidity, and a number of other factors that have to be tested in order to find out how precise they really are. And last but definitely not least, the most reliable thing to which we are prepared, we have the instrumentation in terms of how to measure the ground-based emission. We drill some exploratory holes, we probe them, and then we actually can establish the near-ground methane emission very, very accurately. And the tests were being run at the Morcinek coal mine. Well, having said that, I thank you very much for your attention. Yes, I probably exceeded my time, for which I apologize. Yes, Professor, thank you very, very much. Thank you for this very insightful presentation of incredibly important information from the perspective of the regulation that you referred to, the one that is currently being consulted. You also drew attention to some very important items. Firstly, how cost-intensive it is to go about the process of pursuing those potential goals proposed by the European Commission. Secondly, how incredibly enormous the involvement, the contribution, and the effort would be to explore and test all the mines in the Upper and Lower Silesia, those decommissioned mines. Actually, I read some results of a report of the Central Mining Institute, their tests at the Lower Silesian mines, former mines, and after a year, post-decommissioning, and we are talking about something that was decommissioned 25 years ago, the increase of methane emission was noted by nearly 80%. It is estimated that after 15 years, a decommissioned mine still releases below 1% of methane. That's what stems from the Central Mining Institute research, which, well, actually implies that we would involve huge capital, including human capital, to monitor what, economically speaking, is even, difficult to grasp. That would generate enormous costs for the Polish economy. That's something that we should definitely focus on as well. However, we've been talking about all those operations related to prevention, monitoring, pre-operation demethanation, the one that is actually being conducted in underground headings, drifts, and transverses, also pre-operation. We're also talking about all the efforts and works that, according to me, would or could be successfully performed on a ground-based basis, so that couple of years or more than a dozen years before operation starts, we can actually, and after decommissioning, demethanation can be actually conducted via the individual exploratory digs. However, more about the demethanation techniques, especially those most difficult ones from ventilation with 0.3, 0.5% of concentration with very high moisture content and high pollution of ventilation air, because ventilation shafts extract not only methane from the gobs or from individual places where methane is actually becoming accumulated, but it also release methane, and they actually ventilate all the headings where miners do work. Now, all these matters will be discussed by Professor Stanisław Nawrat, professor of the AGH Academy of Mining Metallurgy and an experienced researcher of all those methane-involving processes.
Panie Przewodniczący, dziękuję bardzo za zaproszenie.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, dear MEP, for the invitation. I have a pleasure of introducing myself. I'm like two in one, 25 years in the mining sector at all levels until I was a supervisor and then director of a coal mine. I am a signatory of the formation of JSW in 1994, deputy CEO, vice president for production. So I have some experience, practical experience. And the second of the two-in-one is the 25 years of work at the AGH, University of Technology and Science that I have in my experience. I am trying to introduce, because we're talking about EU regulations, greenhouse effect, greenhouse gas, and it all ends up and results in phasing out coal mines. That would be the easiest solution. There's no problem, and that's it, right? But in my opinion, we have more time, we have still some time, and we should use methane for energy sources, which is an economic and environmental opportunity for Silesia and for Poland, because there's no coal anywhere else in Poland than in Silesia. So let's use it as in the same way as they're doing in other mining sectors. I'm not going to talk about what Professor Prusek has already talked about, because there are some issues that overlapped in our presentations. The fuel situation is difficult globally, so we need to use what we can in the time available. The EU climate policy is very costly, and in the regulation, that's another step to increase the requirements. It's not 0.5 megatons, but more and more. There are some requirements. There's a need for local fuels. We can use it here in Silesia. I will skip what Professor Prusek has already talked about. I would just like to you to note the problem of the amount of methane that is not utilized, that is paid in coal. 126 million of cubic meters. It's captured but not utilized. And it's released to the atmosphere by companies in Poland. We've got all kinds of units, universities that should solve the problem. It's a difficult problem to solve, obviously. It's not supplied evenly. There's a lot of difficulties. It's difficult to create an engine, gas engine, that would work for 1 hour a day for 1 month. But so this is complicated, but we could make a new plan. We could discuss a new problem where we have pipelines, like, for instance, to close phased-up mines like 1 Maja coal mine that could accept or to Moszczenica coal mine. We could drain the methane there. In Upper Silesia, we have such coal mines. Maybe well, it's difficult. It's a difficult problem. We want to drain the gas from gobs. It's an open subject to discuss. We need to think of how to use 126 million of cubic meters of methane. If we calculate it as 300,000 zlotys per year, right? If you translate it into natural gas. It's a good gas that should be used. That's one thing that I wanted to talk about. I'm not going to repeat what the professor has already said about utilization of methane. We've prepared a project where you can see the ventilation shaft methane. 2012, it was the first such project where the methane was drained to a catalytic, through-and-through catalytic reactor, which produced heat that allowed to produce electric power. Now the situation has changed. There's a lot of companies. We've already mentioned Profile company. They, the Central Mining Institute had a positive study, and Barbara coal mine. There was another company they acquired, Methane, that 50 years ago implemented this technology. So I think in Poland, well, I can say my colleagues from JSW, I think there should be a pilot installation in one of the coal mines where we'll be working on our own solution that where we can use methane for energy sources. For catalytic combustion, it should be more than 0.3%. The higher, the more energy in the gas. But we also need to remember that we need to create flares for the burning and oxidation of methane. Will be that what I'm talking about PGG coal mines where the methane concentration is lower in these coal beds, and JSW will have a similar problem in many shafts, in shaft 3 of Pniówek coal mine and others. But for me, the most severe problem is that we don't use properly in Poland the methane phased out from closed coal mines. There's a huge project for 25 million euro or zloty. We're discovering it, and the world has discovered it already 50 years ago. But I think we will change this approach. In Westphalia, in Saarbrücken, they've been draining methane from coal mines for 15 years. The pipelines are 100 kilometers long. They produce 40 megawatt of energy of it. In Steag mine gas in Westphalia, green gas, these are the technologies that could be used already today at a low cost by drilling 1, 2, 3, 10 boreholes for 2-3 million zlotys, and the effect would be huge. Here you can see the gobs. We close the shafts. Here it's a closed shaft. No ventilation in such a coal mine, so the methane gets accumulated. So there's hyperpressure that pushes the gas to the surface. You have many examples of that. In Orłów, in Czech Republic, there was an explosion of methane in a garage, in a basement of a house. 4 people died. And now there's a provision included in the regulation that has to be monitored, the methane concentration on ground level. So theoretically, we are to close down the mines very quickly, efficiently, but we never think about draining the methane from them. In Germany, when preparing for closing down a coal mine, they prepare a plan on what they can do with methane. I went to SRK, and I asked if we could do it, implement it, but they said that there are no funds to do it. So this is something that has to be done while phasing out coal mines. SRK has prepared in drainage of methane in Krupiński coal mine in Shaft 6. So there's something going on in this area, but the resources in coal mines are huge. We have some experience. Morcinek, for instance, this is the data from a few years ago, 57 million cubic meters of methane. 1 Maja coal mine, 116 million cubic meters. Moszczenica field, over 10 billion cubic meters. It's Moszczenica coal mine and all the other coal mines adjacent to it. Nobody takes up the subject. The Ministry of Environment, only for 7 years, it takes them 7 years to get a concession. I don't know if it's a short period of time or if it's too long, but it's a problem of our central government and the chief geologist, who should speed up the process and plan in general the way of managing methane from closed coal mines. Not many concessions have been issued because those who try to get them, they cannot get them. Minister Jędrysek has created some procedures, but all these public consultations, environmental permit, and all these procedures are very complex and complicated. Now here, that's Morcinek coal mine, closed in the year 2000. The water rises in the coal mine. At some point, it was flooded. It's the fate of all coal mines. We don't have the time to wait for many years. For natural, due to natural supply of gas, they will be flooded. 1 Maja is already flooded at the level of 140 meters and up to the level 610 meters. And here, Czech coal mine on the other side in Czech Republic. They regulate the water level and the hyperpressure of gas. The pressure is 2 bar, and they're pumping it to Czech in the Czech Republic. Now here, that's it's 5 million methane times 10 million zlotys, so it's worth it, really. Now then, 1 Maja coal mine, there are some boreholes made to give access to the gobs. And they've drained methane from it. There'll be 2 engines installed there, 1.3 megawatts each. Then another coal mine, Żory coal mine. It seemed there was no methane there, but when we drilled a hole to the gobs, it's 6 million cubic meters per year of methane. And Gazprom is draining it. Here there are the containers and demethanization station and an engine of 2 megawatts. So they're producing energy and heating and housing estate that is adjacent to the coal mine. No, I'm not going to repeat that. Anna coal mine, there's a borehole. They are waiting for some tests. They're waiting to get the concession for 2 years only for now. Then the area of Anna coal mine, you can see that there's no huge undertakings are required. These are boreholes like 500-600 meters. It's just a week's work, and 1 million zlotys, that's the cost. So it's not a big issue. And Moszczenica, huge gobs. I used to be the director of Moszczenica coal mine, so I know what's underground there. We could had some dozens of boreholes, and we could provide heat for the whole Jastrzębie with this methane alone. Then another issue is the capturing of methane through shaft 6 in Moszczenica mine and Krupiński coal mine, the closed one. The methane deposits are about, according to our estimates, about several billion cubic meters, and we have specific instruments, scientific and programs instruments that could detect the level of methane in specific areas of the mine. Here, for instance, you can see how the coal mine will be flooded in time. The level 820 is already flooded, and then in the years 2033 until 2023, we're projecting how it is going to be flooded. We cut off the coal when it's flooded. The coal does not produce methane, and methane is compressed. Yes, I'm about to finish. And here you can see how complex these post-mining gobs can be. And when using appropriate methodology, here the Petroleum and Gas Department can actually use these tools to evaluate it and estimate these levels of methane. So to conclude, I would like to address the Ministry of Climate to prepare a comprehensive plan of action with regards to the management of methane deposits in closed coal mines. But on the other, and the whole process and verification of the whole legislative process, so that an entrepreneur or a company that can be created, that they can get this methane from the closed coal mine. I want to emphasize once again, perhaps you've been to Stag in Saarbrücken, Gringas, Westphalia. We've seen it all. So that's all I wanted to say. I think that methane is not only a problem, that's how we perceive it, but it's also an opportunity for the economy, for Silesia, for energy production, and we should use it in Silesia. Thank you very much. Obviously, we are aware of all these elements related to environmental constraints and EU law, that on the one hand, with a directive, it obliges us to have impact on all these elements in a regressive way, all these elements that have influence on the emission on greenhouse gases, including methane. But on the other hand, EU directives and legislation impose such restrictive regulations that, as you noticed, that very often prolong the time for getting some decisions and concessions and all the elements related to it. Now, I would like to give the floor to Ryszard Dyrda to present his own technology of methane utilization. or elimination. Please stick to the time. You can sit down. I don't know if it works. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to welcome the chairman and all of you. My name is Ryszard Dyrda. I'm a CEO of PMX company. But the presentation is okay. Now it's correct. Okay, we've implemented this this installation with Profile company. It has been mentioned already. As PMX, we were a technological partner, so we implemented and explored this and operated the installation in Barbara coal mine during tests. Thanks to the approval of the Central Mining Institute, the installation was tested in detail. A very positive report was prepared. And in the report, the team was very important, the team that was appointed by the Central Mining Institute. It was chaired by Robert Hildebrand. He supervised the work of the team. So what was confirmed in the test results? Now, the reversive work of the installation, low temperature of oxidation of methane, high efficiency of oxidation. This is what the installation looked like. Looks very simple. These are the technical parameters of the installation. For those of you who are interested, it's quite clear. For those of you who are not engineers, it's not important and it's negligible. I would like, however, to point to one thing on how the existing infrastructure of the testing coal mine Barbara was used. Both the lift shaft and the ventilation shaft, they were used, and the installation was built right next to the ventilation shaft. This is the dashboard, operator's dashboard. That's the core and heart and the center of the ventilation of the installation. Here, you can see the temperature of operation of the catalytic afterburner, and the accuracy of the efficiency here in the top right-hand corner, the 100% efficiency. That's what I will discuss in detail in a moment. But the software allowed us to run the installation in an automatic mode, so we could shift automatically from one afterburner to another. 0.3% concentration, effectiveness of 97%, higher concentration, 0.5%, so it's like moderate concentration. The efficiency of methane elimination, 97%, 18,000 cubic meters per hour. Why 97? Because when we shift the afterburners, on the effectiveness diagram, you can see a drop in the efficiency, and the efficiency is not in percentage terms, but it's calculated for every point in time. Let me come back to the previous slide. There's a diagram showing the cooling of the system of 20 degrees per hour. So we did that to determine the concentration for thermal operation of the installation, and that's when we have 0.15% of concentration of methane. Thank you very much. I have presented a technology that can be implemented on industrial scale. It's just a matter of demand and the possibility of using it. So if you're interested, feel free to approach me. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I am sure that this presentation and these results of Barbara testing coal mine will show you that it's possible to implement these solutions on a broader scale to reduce methane emissions. When speaking about investments, I would like to give the floor to the CEO of Węglokoks, Tomasz Heryszek, to discuss the plan of low-emission steel mill.
Szanowna Pani Poseł, Szanowny Panie Ministrze, Szanowni
Madam MEP, professors, presidents, all the acclaimed guests and visitors here, ladies and gentlemen. As kind of an introduction to my presentation, let's say to my slot that I prepared, actually a very short presentation here on the investment. It is currently at the phase of preparations, actually. However, the policy we are generally referring to, which definitely blends into the world of business, and let me give you my personal reflection, is a certain, let's say, resultant of two matters. First being the manner how the European Parliament will respond to the needs of individual countries and what the climate policy be adopted by the European Union. I'm not just talking about 2 or 3 or 4 year perspective, I'm talking about the perspective of decades. What should be stressed is that currently across the EU, based on sociological studies, it can be inferred that young people are significantly more oriented towards the strive for carbon neutrality and clean air that nobody questions, obviously. However, the young European generations are also even more restrictive towards that than the old generations. With regard to that, we should definitely think whether in the decades to come, the EU, to put it colloquially, will really phase out heavy industry that will always generate some emissions outside of Europe. That's one thing. Second thing is obviously financing and the financial matter. So obviously, will it be very political? And we are obviously fighting for the votes of young election. They will become even more and more clear across the EU. The question is whether we can at least balance this trend. What follows is obviously the need for financing. Now, in this light, the problem with heavy industry, which we are all focusing on, stressing the matter of methane now. However, in future, also heavy industry at large. Industry that creates jobs, that is the very foundation of the growth and welfare of all regions and states. It built the very power of China, as the world's second largest economy of the world. How to counteract the negative trends in this respect? I suppose the answer to this question mustn't be built here, cannot be formed now. But there is things that we can do. The investment program, that is to a certain extent an attempt to cater to the high needs of the climate policy on the one hand, on the other hand, the requirements of the banking system that is willingly accepting any amendments to the Environment Directive. So hence our proposal, hence a solution that we wanted to propose as the Węglokoks Group. That has its resources, some steel working and steel processing assets that do need their own steel for in-house needs. Hence our proposal that we also see in my presentation. Poland needs its own steel. Poland must obtain steel on an in-house basis. Otherwise, we will obviously have to purchase steel from outside, and we will buy it from Asian markets, which is not conducive to Polish industry security. So global steel production, ladies and gentlemen, is about 2 billion tons per annum, out of which in Poland we produce about 8 million, nearly 8 million. Our consumption is 2 times higher than that. As you can see in this nice presentation, we import 80% of steel, but 20% is produced on an in-house basis. It goes without saying that an important matter is the financial resources. Virtually nobody right now is speaking about, well, emissivity as such. No bank will grant you a loan or any subsidy or grant financing support to any project that is conducive and compliant with very high ethical standards. Well, the favoriness of the favoring eye of local authorities is something that proves to be very important. And in this respect, we are talking about the energy in need, that one to power the steel mill that we are going to deploy. I'm talking about the project. There is currently being visualized. There is currently planned to be installed at the very heart of the Upper Silesian agglomeration in the city of Ruda Śląska. And I'm talking about state-of-the-art industry. One that will take care of the environment. One that will also be bankable, which means that it can be financed under very strict and rigorous criteria that the whole banking system has adopted across the EU. Obviously, the scrap processing policy is yet another component that we definitely will be keeping track of over the recent years. We're talking about the span of 3 up to 5 years in horizon. As you can see, this is the timeline for this project. As far as the steel mill's capacity is concerned, as well as our needs, both ours and the whole country's needs, these needs will definitely grow. The demand will grow because the enormous consumption of structural steel is something imminent. Hence our motto, that one which we propose, which actually has something to do with the climate policy to a certain extent, most certainly, as far as financing. Maybe not directly related to methane, however, we have noticed the very urgent need for that to be deployed over the next years. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for this great and very concise presentation. The investment plans of yours definitely are aligned with our plans for our voivodeship for this region. However, we mustn't put a blind eye on the assumptions of the European Committee of Regions as far as climate policy and the energy package are concerned, including the methane-related regulations, those that Isabella Claude has mentioned. I think we should talk more about that. Indeed, all these threats have been enumerated by the previous speakers, and now, right, I would like to see Tomasz Rogala, the president and CEO of Polska Grupa Górnicza, to comment upon that. One that is actually taking part in various levels of the EU structures. So, Mr. President, I think you should deliver this information so that we can expand our knowledge on this.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the invitation. First of all, I would like to refer to what the MEP said in inviting EU politicians who said that it would not be involved in a political event, but obviously it's a climate discussion. It's mainly a political discussion that translates into the economy when defining which source is allowable and from which direction. Now, when referring to those provisions of the methane directive, I would like to quote some numbers so that you understand how difficult and threatening the situation is. So in PGG, we captured 274 millions of cubic meters that's emitted of cubic meters of methane. 85 million is captured, and we can increase it by 30 million, but 160 million, that's the methane in ventilation shaft, and we don't have a effective method of capturing it. Now, in practical terms, let's think of what happens if this directive is implemented as it is now, without any amendments. Today, the provisions state that the maximum emission is 3 tons per 1,000 tons of mined coal. In 2027, we need to close 2/3 of PGG because we don't meet this requirement. We have 8.1 per 1,000 tons. And to provide the performance of phasing out coal 2049, we should take into account some provision. So we should actually, for phasing out the coal mines, so we should assume it's like 12, 13. So if this decision is maintained below 8, that's strictly political because it's the reverse of the social agreement, upside down, because maintaining the deadline for 2027, it's not doable under these regulations. The second element that is related to the utilization of captured methane. This is something we, as entrepreneurs and academics and researchers, should be working on, how to use this methane. Where we can, we capture it because it's a matter of security. So it's better to capture it when preparing long walls, preparing galleries, preparing deposits. So that's security and that's also energy. So we don't need extra incentives to do it from the European Union. And this part is done without any intervention, but the remaining part is the one that is not included in those regulations. What do they also say there? They write about charges. So that's the second part of the threat that we need to realize. We're talking about challenges, and soon it might end up in closing the whole sector because we won't be able to perform according to these requirements. In the charges, we read that if we have a certain amount of tons of methane from the ventilation shaft, we need to set up a charge, a fee, that will be determined by the member state, but it has to be adequate, discouraging, and depriving of economic benefits. So let's forget about introducing any minimal charges for these methane. So no commercial benefit, adequate and deterring. That means that we cannot generate any benefit and profit on that. So that's the purpose of this regulation, of this provision. So when we think about the methodology that actually accompanies the narrative in the European Union, it will stand for penalties at a very high level, and we can be 90% sure that will be talking about a reference point being CO2. This will be the starting point to calculate well, the ton of CO2 emissions. This will be the reference point. So according to the most conservative estimates, it's 2,100 euros per ton. So it ends up our production, and we will have to shift to imports of energy. So these are the two things I wanted to mention during this conference. If it's below 12 tons, that means closing the coal mines. If it's implemented in such a broad sense, not without making them more precise, it also means closing the coal mines. It has to be more precise. It should specify the right of a member state to define all these levels. Hence, that's why further procedure on the 29th of November is of key importance, because just let me depart from the business part. I showed you the number, but if it happens like that, it's another element of political interaction between Brussels and Poland, because it means that somebody has to inform the trade unions and people that the agreement that was made is undoable, because we're assuming some requirements that will actually end up the agreement in 2027. And something that the MEP has already said is that it refers to hydrocarbons produced in the European Union. So it means that hydrocarbons will be evaluated based on declarations. And it seems like discrimination a little bit, because domestic producers won't be able to implement local production based on domestic resources, because it directly says that it cannot be beneficial economically. But we will be relying on declarations from China, from Saudi Arabia, on how much methane they have. I'm looking at my colleague from Glocaux. They will declare there's zero methane production, right? Emission. I can be sure of that. And we need hydrocarbons, liquid and gas hydrocarbons. We will pretend it's zero, right? Because nobody will deny people energy in the sockets. So a lot has been said here already, so I don't want to prolong it, but I want you to note that, first of all, if the rate is 3 tons, and in Poland, PGG 8 tons, or in Jastrzębie, in JSW is higher because there's more methane in the deposits, that means closing the coal mine. If these provisions are so general on the charges and fees, including this provision that it cannot be economically beneficial, we're talking about very high charges. It means closing the coal mines. And if it doesn't work, it will be another Turów, right? Huge penalties imposed on the member state. And the last element is a form of discrimination, and lawyers should think about it, because it's discrimination of European economy as compared to others who will be declaring the methane emissions of their product without any verification method. From Colombia, from China, it will be zero methane. Only the domestic one will be methane emitting, hence the severe nature of this situation. That's why we need to talk about it. That's why we need to get through to the society, the local community, and our social and trade union partners, because there's another instrument, very dangerous instrument being created. But I don't want to prolong it, but I wanted to show you the three difficulties that are ahead of us so that we are aware of what's going on and what are the consequences in numbers. So thank you very much once again for inviting me. Thank you very much for a very informative and precise, detailed presentation that showed us the consequences of the regulation that we cannot actually calculate right now, but we see the estimates. It's a hugely restrictive action. If this instrument is implemented, this will introduce a lot of inequality between European producers. Poland is a leader. I'm talking about coal production. So it cannot end up by being ignorant of it. We need to take a stand in this matter. So we need to prepare arguments to take a serious approach and discussion on these matters. But speaking about these challenges and the possibility of using technology in a modern way, I would like to give the floor to the CEO of Tauron New Technologies, Piotr Apollo. Please, will you have a presentation? Yes, okay, so please, the floor is yours.
Pani europoseł, bardzo dziękujemy za zaproszenie, że tutaj też głos naszej spółki może być zaprezentowany. Panie ministrze.
Thank you very much for inviting me, obviously, and thank you for having me. Minister, Madam MEP, I think the key matter is also the regulatory risk for the sake of business activity. A lot's been said about that, and obviously analyzing what will be in store for us in the future. We decided to act, to respond. At the Brzeszcze mine, we installed gas engines of 10.8 megawatts of capacity. It's already been in operation. No impositions, no obligations imposed by the EU forced us to do that. We just wanted to make use of methane that we had to produce energy, to increase our efficiency. We also perceive this matter from the perspective of security and obviously ecology. Now, since I don't have too much time, we'd like to show you a very short video highlighting this system, and so that you can see that this system is already operational. Obviously, if you want to visit that in Brest, you're most welcome. Electricity and heat from methane, the cogeneration system at Tauron. The cogeneration system processes methane gas into electricity and into heat. Behind me, there are two cogeneration engines with 2.6 megawatts of power capacity, producing electricity from mine gas. So the methane in gaseous form is delivered to this installation, which is delivered from demethanation of mine headings from the Brzeszcze mining station, delivered by this pipeline to the cogeneration system. Demethanation of coal mines, even after the given mine is phased out or extraction is closed, actually takes place quite significantly long time, about 10 years, up to the point where extraction of methane and the given uptake of methane can actually deplete. This is a mobile system which comprises containers. At any time we can dismantle it and move to a new location where gas is delivered to. The whole system is automated, the process of information transfer and processing of information for every single parameters, every agents, pressures, output power, and so on and so forth. It is all possible to be monitored and controlled from headquarters in Katowice. What you can hear in the background is the sound of the engines at 100% of capacity. It's basically silent. As far as the noise emitted into the environment is so environmentally friendly. Nearby, this is actually a housing estate for semi-detached houses. Let me just add that obviously good collaboration with the company Węglokoks is obviously well deserve to mention because we have signed a contract for delivery of heat. It all makes the methane to bring certain advantages, allowing us to obtain heat while we increase our efficiency. Obviously, there is certain, let's say, bonus considering the risk that we incurred. This is an investment that is obviously very effective, but also very efficient. Probably the most efficient investment we had over the last year. I would like to stress once again, it's not due to any declarations and obligations imposed by the EU. I hope that companies will seek new and innovative solutions on their own for their in-house basis. Thank you very much. And I would like to not spend most of your time. And by the way, congratulations on the very fact that the ROI spans 1 year. This is impressive result, really. Now, on the other hand, thinking about a longer time perspective, thinking of this perspective of operations, I strongly encourage everybody to really look for innovative solutions that will allow all the businesses, even in cases of, let's say, decommissioning of parts of mines or entire mines, to prepare individual components, letting them to actually make use of the methane uptakes even after the mining extraction, mining operations are decommissioned, especially when methane concentrations are the highest. Yes, what we also took into consideration is the regulatory risk. Starting from 2025, the conditions will change. Why we do that? Tauron Technology is but a small, very mobile, very agile company that implements state-of-the-art projects, and we have noticed the very risk that past 2025, coal mines will not be able to run any other operations but extraction. So what we do is basically we generate energy and sell it to the market. It's actually good that we've created such an offering also to other parties interested. Thank you again. So, kind of spontaneously, we moved to discussion, even though there was my presentation also assumed in the agenda. However, in this panel of speakers, I have a plan to actually extend my presentation here, since we have representatives of GSW here. This is the point, which is not in the agenda, by the way. If any representative of GSW intends or feels like speaking up, obviously this is the time and place for you. And I actually strongly suggest that, which will obviously also face some questions. Mr. President, yes, you're all welcome. Yes, thank you. If I may, actually, I will make most of this opportunity and make a stand. I haven't prepared any presentation, indeed, because it was something unprepared, actually, so that is a kind of a spontaneous standpoint. A couple of words, just a couple of words. I'm not personally involved in working on this regulation. However, I've been discussing with the European milieus since the very beginning, collaborating with the mining community, for which I thank you, and the Central Mining Institute, for which I obviously also am thankful. I'm glad that today we are participating in this conference, showing that more and more people start talking about the methane problem, and increasing numbers of people actually understand this problem of methane. Initially, that was just the EU strategy vis-à-vis methane, the one that spanned till 2020, then obviously past that deadline. And at various conferences, we were highlighting these problems, that the penalties to be imposed will be at levels of billions of zlotys to every company if we fail to comply. However, no response from the EU. The EU didn't really want to, or the European Commission actually didn't want to participate in technical words. They were actually explaining themselves by some, let's say, technical problems. Generally speaking, we saw their very conducive approach from the environmental organizations. So as Mr. Rogala has mentioned, there will be possible to actually translate methane capture into CO2 equivalents, whether this is actually assumed at a level of 28 as in global potential, or even higher. Ecologists even suggest that 85% should be the cap. As the speaker of the European Commission has already mentioned, that this is very stressful problem. And now, considering what the minister mentioned, what Madam MEP has mentioned, and seeing so many people actually involved in all these actions, I hope that these conditions, the provisions of the regulations that are so restrictive, could be changed. In technical terms, we are virtually incapable of complying with these regulations. Actually, the other matter that was mentioned here in this particular report, whether this is 3 tons or something else, actually over a year of the time since the beginning of the talks, we only successfully convinced the EU about the difference between the power-generating coal and a coking coal, or otherwise steam coal and coking coal. However, the rest of the province was completely disregarded. Now, following my recent visit, as far as the blast and combustion of methane from the methanation stations, it is clear that the EU has started understanding the problem in more technical terms. They started talking about increase the combustion. To us, engineers, the manner to talk about is actually how to follow up, what sort of path to take, what sort of targets to assume and pursue. I hope that in the European milieu we can achieve more, and in terms of individual subjects, we are always available to consult. Well, thank you very much, Director. I'm looking around. If there are any persons that would like to ask some questions or join in, go on, please. I don't see, so let me please make this brief and concise summary. A couple of very important matters mentioned. The very draft of the regulation and approach of the European Commission and the whole European Union and all the involved institutions, what can be seen in this respect, they are all very determined. Their approach to the matter of methane, and let me again quote the rapporteur, the speaker from the European Commission, we must urgently start acting in terms of setting the targets. Now, one thing is missing. No time limits were set to allow us in an evolutionary manner to actually deploy these targets. Well, yes, independent monitoring institutions, yes, in Europe, but not around the world. So again, a significant element of unbalance in terms of competition, global, quick and rigorous actions, and not a single word about how to build the resource and energy security for every recipient in Europe. Well, to a certain extent, the European Commission is completely tacit, completely silent about this matter. It may happen that whatever gets into European market is not monitored to an extent to be treated on a level playing field. And we actually face these situations where imported fuels and technological processes via directives deployed into the legal framework of the EU member states caused significant unbalance in terms of competition. To cut a long story short, production of steel, production of all the elements related to business and economy. It all boils down to the following. Such a stringent climate versus energy law, which is not yet in force, is something to be considered. So in the countries that have not yet deployed the climate and energy policy, they should be convinced about it. They should be made to realize that. At least 50% of mines are still operational. It is estimated that 2/3 of all the mines in Poland, for instance, are methane-rich. And all the EU decisions are political decisions. The climate policy is by far a policy by definition. And the arguments that we are referring to today are purely technical, engineering, technological, substantive, and subject-specific. And to cut a long story short, JSW for many years has been a leader in the implementation of cogeneration in practice, in how they implement their methane-fired engines and motors into practice. They are definitely a leading partner here. A significant challenge to us is how to plan pre-operation demethanation, how to utilize ventilation air methane, because this is by far the most difficult challenge in technical terms. So far, all the technologies proposed used to be very costly. Thinking about the situation of the mining industry from a couple of years ago and the current situation of the mining industry, because it's not just that the price of coal is very high. As experts in mining and energy, we are all aware of the fact that we are talking about positive and negative economic condition periods. We really have to prep ourselves up for the negative period, and we are obviously facing some time limits as well. So just a couple of reports from research on the Institute of Geological Studies and the land survey conducted thereof 5-6 years ago, but I suppose that basically they don't depart significantly from the current situation. Balance extractable resources, documented prospective and prospective methane resource, 168 billion cubic meters, divided by certain elements. Well, fossils, primary fossils, 26 million cubic meters, 16% of the mix. Prospective fossils, 52.8 billion cubic meters. And the potential resources, 54 million. The potential estimated by the State Geological Institute is 230 up to 250 billion cubic meters. So we are talking about a range of values that, according to both I and most of you, is very prospective, with the potential to utilize. Thinking about the resources from the Subcarpathian region, unexplored but estimated at 4 billion cubic meters. Thinking about the delivery of gas from the directions that are currently very important, strategically important from the perspective of our country's energy security. I'm talking about Baltic Pipe, for instance, and the Norwegian Northern Shelf deposits, which are converted into natural gas, plus 10 billion cubic meters. So if you add it to this very map, the capacity and the potential for new technologies that will allow us to extract methane from unoperated, unextracted mining fields, but also from decommissioned mines whose methane-bearing capacity was very, very high, well, I think in store for us is a significant number of investments that will allow us to make use of the resources that we have. However, we have to consider one very important matter, as Mr. Prusek mentioned. There is but one project that actually had carbon or coal in its name, actually received some co-funding, some subsidy from the EU. And that's a threat. That's something we have to realize. Because if we are told to move from this methane emission range as soon as possible, thinking about hard coal or lignite as those high methane-bearing fossil fuels on the one hand, however, on the other hand, imposing very strict emission limits in terms of CO2 emission, preventing us from actually being very economical in terms of methane processing. And again, pulling out this handbrake and preventing us, hampering us as far as investing in coal mining and around coal mining. So, having said that, what seems to be very important, considering how we are supported by various financial institutions, we should build space, allowing us to act via banks, development funds, and some NGOs that we can actually implement some investments. This debate actually highlighted three specific elements: threats in the regulation, prospects for investing in coal industry and around the coal industry in order to make use of this accompanying fossil, and three, the resource and energy security of Poland for the next couple of decades. Having said that, I would like to thank all the speakers that were actually very interesting. Sorry for being so restricted as far as time is concerned. However, yes, you know, we are all academics and we really have to be kept on a tight leash. I suppose we would be able to actually spend a couple of hours more here talking about that. Regardless of that, on behalf of Izabela Klotz, the member of the European Parliament, I would like to thank everybody who have taken part in this debate. Methane, technology, economy, politics. I hope that your involvement will contribute to our successful fight for what is important to Poland.
Tego Śląskiego Ładu.